I want to talk about some concepts that I think are always emerging here. You know, people are wondering. I think there's a lot of confusion about it, and that has to do with food. You know, what is food? How much should we eat? What are the benefits of fasting? You know, and what the bowels, care of the bowels. You know, kind of that whole concept. And usually I would talk about this after we had the anatomy lecture on the gastrointestinal system, but it just seems like it's time because there's so much confusion. So anyway, and we'll talk a little bit about anatomy and functions, physiology. But if you, so let's talk about this tube. There's a tube that begins up here at the mouth and it ends at the rectum, anus. And that tube varies in length, of course, like everything, depending on the size of the person. And that tube is you know, if you ever look at when an embryo is being formed, as it's being formed, it's really a tubular structure. You know, it's kind of it's a ball at first, then it turns into a tube, and then out of the tube grow the rest of it. But it's that tube that is really central to the whole organism, because it's that tube that allows the organism to get, well, the human. Let's stay with humans. But it's true for all some reptiles, amphibians, all mammals, and of course us. You know, it's not true for insects and other animals like that. But basically, that tube, what's on the inside of that tube is still considered outside of that body, and that tube has a lining around it that absorbs. Processes and absorbs whatever in that lining and brings it into the body, and it goes through the bloodstream. So it's absorbed into the bloodstream and it's carried around. And it'll go and attach wherever it needs to go. Okay? Well, for humans and other primates, and also a lot of mammals, what happens is all the food that's absorbed, or all the substances that are absorbed, go directly into a system of veins that get, you know, it's a lot of veins, and then they merge, coalesce into one big vein called the portal vein that goes into the liver. And then the liver will modify those substances so that they can be used by the body. And it does it in 2 steps. Sometimes the first step, when it modifies that substance into the first step, it becomes what's called toxic intermediate, and it can be toxic. So if you don't have that second step working, you're going to wind up getting toxic from these substances. For example, dioxin. Everyone's heard of dioxin. You know, it's all around the earth now. You know, it's a very, very small amounts will kill lots of people. What it does is it turns on that phase 1 part of the liver, and not phase 2. And so what happens is you get these incredible. So dioxin itself is not bad. It's the intermediate that it's turned into, and then that becomes a severe poison. You know. So, but anyway, I just want to. There's that. So let's just talk about this tube and what is food. You know, food differs depending on the organism. You know, and that's no more clearly seen than, for example, our garbage. We throw our garbage out, and after it starts to get dirty and putrefied and rancid and all that, then you'll start to see bugs in there. Right? You'll see maggots and other organisms eating it. A bear, like I told you in the first lecture, a bear has a bowel movement, it's nourishment for other organisms. So to define what food is, you have to know what you're talking about. For a snake. Well, for us, and in all these organisms, food is that which is required to be taken into the body to be used for energy and structure. Right? Building and structure and energy. And again, when we talk about structure, another word for structure is anatomy. And anatomy is based on, anatomy has a particular structure because it has a particular function. All right? So, what do humans need? Well, humans need basically about 8 simple amino acids. And amino acids are the amino in that word comes from a nitrogen compound, and that is fixed from the air. It's pulled out of the air by certain bacteria on the roots of plants, and they pull that nitrogen because 70% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Right? Oxygen is about, I don't think we really know. It used to be 21% when I was in junior high, and now it's probably 19, 20%. And it depends if you're in Mexico City, it might be 14%. If you're in Tokyo, so it depends on where you're at. So the oxygen content varies. Nitrogen remains around 70. And then there are other gases. Anyway, that nitrogen is obviously very important. And so it's pulled out of the air, it's fixed to a acid, and it becomes an amino acid. And so basically all amino acids are produced, the original ones are produced by plants. And so every creature that would consume those plants will take those amino acids and maybe form units. So for us, we only need 8 different ones, and out of those 8, we can make the rest. What do amino acids do? When you string them together, they're called peptides. And a peptide is another word for protein. And proteins and peptides are important because they are required for structure and for function. So all enzymes are proteins. Okay, and you remember how important enzymes are. Enzymes are basically the workhorse of nature. Nothing happens in biochemistry without enzymes. Okay, nothing would happen. There would be no life without an enzyme. An enzyme is a catalyst, and a catalyst allows a reaction to occur at a faster rate. So if you have an oxygen molecule and a water molecule, you have oxygen and water in a jar. Maybe once a week, once a month, an oxygen and water will come together with the right energy and the right angle and form an H2O2 combined. And then at another time that H2O2 will go back into water and oxygen. So this might happen once a month. If you have an enzyme called catalase, it will happen over 1 million times per second. And other enzymes produce reactions at 400 times a minute, 5,000 times a second. So you have all these rapid reactions going on that allow life to exist. Okay, so proteins are required for that, amino acids. And a lot of other. So that's one thing that's brought up. The other thing that's brought up that needs to be absorbed by humans is carbohydrates. How are carbohydrates formed? What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates.
Carbon and hydrogen?
Yeah, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. CHO. And what they are is they're energy yielding compounds. So when they're broken down, they yield energy. And this is how we get energy. So what's the most simple carbohydrate is sugar. Right? And then you get to more complex carbohydrates. And there are only a few different sugars. And sugars they've got basically 6 carbons. There are some 5 carbons like fructose. And they're held in certain bonds. When those bonds are broken, the energy is released. So they're required for energy. So, you've heard of simple sugars, or simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Usually, the basic difference is how many of the basic units are there. So when we look at a potato doesn't have sugar. If you lick a potato, it's not going to be sweet. But what it is it's glucose molecules that are connected to each other by certain bonds. And when those glucose, when that's ingested and those bonds are broken, it releases glucose. So if you do a blood sugar test on someone who ate a potato, like 45 minutes later, you'd probably be around the same as if someone ate a candy bar and you did it 30 minutes later in terms of the sugar. Okay, so potatoes are a way to get sugar, wheat, rice.
Is that true of all starches, though?
Yeah, that's what they are. Starches are they're basically sugar in a certain form, so it can be broken down slowly, more slowly, than is used in a yeast, just pure sugar.
And are those the sugars that we should be eating in a cancer patient, not regular sugars?
Well, no. We'll talk about right now. We're just talking about what the requirements for a human being are. So we require the protein, or the amino acids. We require the sugars, and they come in different forms. For what? For energy. And the sugars are really carbohydrates. And then we require fats, and then minerals and vitamins. I mean, in terms of those substances, we also require air and water, but for the GI tract. We're talking about the GI tract. So, carbohydrates are also used as part of structure, and they form what's called glycoprotein, which is a combination of a sugar and a protein together. And you'll find them as on the surface of cells. They form certain receptors. They perform certain functions, very important functions like immune function. So when we talk to you about taking mushrooms, maitake, shiitake, and stuff like that, those are glycoproteins, and they stimulate the immune system. They'll double the number of natural killer cells. So it's important stuff. So fats or oils, or what are called lipids, right? Lipids can be fats or oils. The difference between a fat and an oil is just that one is solid at room temperature and one is liquid at room temperature, right? So the fat you would see on a piece of flesh is solid at room temperature, right? But the fat that comes out of hemp seeds is a liquid at room temperature. That's just because it has a different melting point. Everything has a different melting point. Everything in the physical universe has three phases: solid, liquid, gas. So, anyway, what are fats used for? Fats are used, and I didn't tell you everything that carbs are used for and everything that amino acids are used for, because it's too much to do it all, but just to get a basic understanding. Fats are used in a lot of ways. For one, they make up most of the nervous system, the brain and the peripheral nerves, the spinal cord, the lining of them. If you have a wire, an electrical wire, you've got it insulated with that rubber plastic. If you peeled it off, it would move more slowly. It wouldn't propagate as fast. It's that line, it's that covering. It's not only to protect you, but it's also for the rapid movement. Otherwise, the energy escapes out. And that keeps it going.
So that's what happens in MS, kind of.
Yes.
Sheath on the nerve.
Yeah.
Gone right in.
Right. So the question is, that's what happens in multiple sclerosis, MS. In MS, you have the you have the immune system producing holes in the sheath that surrounds the nerve. And when you do that, energy leaks out. And so they get like a droopy eyelid or whatever, because that nerve is not working as fast. So it's called myelin. Very important. without it, it wouldn't function. So oils are also fats, lipids are also part of the. They are the main constituent of cell membranes. So every cell in the body, which is the most basic functional unit, has a skin, a surface, which is made of lipids, and because lipids will separate the water on both sides, the water soluble stuff. So it actually gives it a coat. Also, it has certain structures, shapes, and different functions for different receptors. So it allows the interaction of that cell with the rest of its environment. Fats are also used for energy. You can use fats for energy. The brain can, the heart can. Okay. Amino acids, which we talked about before, can occasionally be used for, in times of stress, physical stress, be used for energy as well. It goes through a certain biochemical cycle. Heart can do it. Muscle can do it. Brain can. Brain needs glucose. So, and then, that's enough fats, but they're absolutely critical. So the idea of a low-fat diet is a mistake. A low-fat diet. You should have zero bad fats and a lot of good fats. And bad fats, what do we mean by bad fats? It's not a moral issue. It means that it cannot be used by the body. It's to perform the function it was designed for. Good fat or a useful fat. Same with, any other substance. So then you have the minerals, and the minerals there's a lot of minerals. Minerals are basically if you look at the periodic table of elements, minerals are more on the left side and they have a positive charge. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, these are all, and there's others, minerals, selenium, nickel, zinc, there's all kinds. Anyway, that positive charge on them means what? It means it's got actually a hole for an electron, so it kind of grabs an electron and moves it along. That's why sodium and potassium are called electrolytes in our blood, right? Because they allow electrons to flow. Electrons are energy. When we think of breaking down a carbohydrate to produce energy, what we're doing is breaking it down and getting electrons. So the basic fundamental substance of energy is our electrons. And plants get that, of course, from the light, from the sun, and they transfer it. And the animals get it from eating bats. It's that transfer of electricity, that transfer of electrons. Right? So when we want to know how your heart's working, we do an EKG to look at the electrical pattern that your heart's producing. And as we stated before, if you have a flat line, there's no electricity being produced, and there's no function, and there's no life. Same with the brain, the muscle, any part of the body. So the energy is really it's a flow of electrons. And no one has ever figured out what an electron is. But the first thing ever created was light. Let there be light. And it's that light that sustains the whole universe. In fact, it's just variations of that light. Variations of energy. Minerals are the way in which these electrons, they're kind of like, so you could think, and they have different functions, and they're used sometimes for structure, like calcium clearly is structure of the bones. Most, it's calcified. But they have a lot of very important functions. It's just you could list it, but it would be long list. But basically, they allow enzymes to work. They're kind of like the battery, the charger inside of an enzyme. So in glutathione, which is the detoxifying enzyme in our cells, it requires, for functioning, selenium. Okay, so if you've got a mouthful of fillings, amalgams, mercury amalgams with mercury in them, and Every time you drink something warm, the mercury comes off, vaporizes, you inhale it, goes into your body, or every time you bite down. The mercury is circulating in your blood. It has a stronger affinity, it's a stronger metal. It'll replace that selenium in the glutathione. Kind of like it puts a wrench right into the middle of the motor that it won't work. So that's how it's a poison. But anyway, so selenium does that, and we need molybdenum for other things. We need calcium for a lot of different things. One heart drug, one class of heart drugs is called calcium channel blockers. Because basically calcium is how our muscles function. Calcium going in and out. Why? Because calcium is carrying a charge. Calcium is 2+, sodium is 1+. It's very complicated. It's way more complicated than anyone could ever comprehend on every level. It's incomprehensible. And the fact that it all functions absolutely perfectly. Absolutely defies atheism. Because if you just think about it, the basic tenet of atheism is that the universe is stupid, not intelligent, and it came from nothing. Out of nothing, one day, everything just happened. They call it the Big Bang. What? It does. You can't even grab that. You can't conceive that out of nothing came everything. So scientists will bring you back to that, and they leave it there. They don't talk about it because it's such a large assumption that out of nothing came everything. What do we call that when out of nothing comes everything? We call that creation. What else do you call it? You got another word for something coming from nothing? Is there another word? I can't think of the other word. So I have to call it creation. Anyway, so I don't know how I got there, but that's because I really have a deep disgust for science. Because the child of science is technology, which is destroying the planet and us. So, anyway. And then vitamins. What are vitamins? Vitamins are, the word vita, life, is something essential for life. And again, a vitamin to one organism is not a vitamin to another organism. All organisms produce something that's essential for life and functioning are different types of ascorbates. It's called ascorbic acid or vitamin C. And, primates, guinea pigs, and fruit bats don't make it. All other horses, dogs, cats, birds, they all produce it. So it's not a vitamin. Their body makes it. Just like we need 8 amino acids, but we have about 20, 21 that we use all the time. So the other ones are not vitamins, because we just need these 8, and out of that we make it. So those, we don't have to ingest those. So if we talk about more protein in something, you don't need more, you only need that. Okay. So that's the vitamin. And then, we think of vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, which is really not a vitamin, vitamin E. Anyway, what they are is they're kind of like, again, they function in enzyme systems. They allow enzymes to work. Okay, so enzymes are the basic protein structure, but then they need, the basic amino acid sequence, the structure, but they need minerals and they need vitamins, which are other substances that make them work. Okay, so and just to quickly mention enzymes. Enzymes are, again, amino acids, so they have a sequence. This one, and this one, and this one, and this one. And that's called the primary structure. And because of the sequence, they have this one is positive, this one's negative, so they fold in a certain way. That's called the secondary structure. And then they have a tertiary structure, which is the shape they form. And the shape they form defines the function. The shape of my hand, the opposing thumb, defines its function. right? My jaw goes horizontally and vertically and around, function. Okay? So, the shape of an enzyme defines its function, and the shape is dependent upon the pH and the temperature. You know, so as temperatures above 105, it starts to lose its shape. Which is why when we heat the substance before we ingest it, above 105, it starts to loses its enzymatic function. At above 118, it no longer can be restored. And that's just a reminder about that. But so anyway, and then of course water. You know, water is the universal solvent, the universal required for life. You know, they're trying to figure out if there's ever been life on the moon. They have to find water. If there's ever been life on Mars, they have to find water. They can't find it. There may be some sort of life forms that are not in water, but we have not in this part of the universe. Anyway, water is universal solvent. In fact, water is more than one lecture. It's a several lecture to understand the properties of water. Water is unbelievable what it does. In fact, we should make that one lecture on water. You should read about it. If you read about it, you get such a reverence and appreciation for what water is. But it's what keeps this planet happening. Keeps all life happening. So it's interesting. And then oxygen is the other one, right? And you put them together, what do you have? Hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. So I think that might be important. So, anyway, you know, no one knows. We lose perhaps, no one knows, 50 billion, 100 billion cells a day become old and are replaced in our bodies. So as they're replaced, they need to be, we need to build new ones. And so that's part of why we have to put things in this tube. So what is food? Food for us is to get those substances into our body so that it can function. Right? Those same basic substances are required by all organisms. They just get it in a different form. So I got into a lot of detail about that. I didn't really mean to, but I think it was helpful. So, if you think about this tube, this 22 to 30 foot tube that begins at the lips and ends at the anus, it has every area has a different function. Okay, so at the beginning of the tube, there are glands around it that secrete what's called saliva. And in that saliva, what are there? Enzymes. And it's kind of a mucousy thing, and so it begins the process. And then the chewing begins the process of breaking down this substance so that it can become usable. So that's where it begins. You know, and then it swallows, and then things happen in the stomach. There are more chemicals secreted. There are enzymes that stimulate another part of the tube a little bit further down, so that it'll start doing what it does. I mean, it's just an amazing. And the stomach also functions sort of like a mouth, in that it causes mechanical destruction without teeth. Okay, so there's no teeth, but it is a muscle. And then it gets down into the next part, and the next part starts secreting, and it all requires different pHs and different. They all function differently, and they require different biochemistry. And then the next part, the duodenum, which is just after the stomach, that's where fats, amino acids, carbohydrates are kind of broken down into their most simplest form so they can be absorbed. And they're absorbed in that part of the small intestines and the next part. Now, there are really no parts. We made them up. You know, we gave them names, you know, but we define those things by the kinds of cells that are there. So it breaks it down, and then we absorb it. And that which cannot be used at all, or was not properly processed because the digestive function is not healthy, All that stuff remains in the tube and goes down into the latter part, the last 5 feet. And water, remember, water is very important, so water needs to be conserved. So all along this way, what's being absorbed is water. And then the remaining 10 to 15% of that water is absorbed when we're in the last 5 feet of the intestines, called the colon. Then we got to get rid of that stuff quickly, which we don't. I mean, 6 hours after eating, you should have an empty colon. But we don't. So, it's only common sense. So what is food? We just defined what is food. Where do we get those substances? Well, we get those substances. They're most plentiful and abundant and in a usable, bioavailable form in plants, in plant material. Plant just took the energy from the light and formed carbohydrates. Right? It's got the amino acids, the protein. It's pulled up the minerals from the ground. So it's got the minerals, it's got the water, and it's got the vitamins. It's got it all. It's in the plants. That big, healthy, fantastic-looking horse ate plants. He'll outrun a lion any day. Keep going. The lion might make it the 50-yard dash faster, but the horse will keep running until nighttime. Anyway, that's where we get it. That's our source of it, and the seeds, everything to do with the plant. So now this comes. So what would be the best way to eat? Should we just keep putting stuff in the tube all day long? Do you think we're going to get an efficient functioning of that tube? No. Because you're going to have this part chewing, this part swallowing, this part doing this part doing this part doing this, and then the back part's getting backed up because you keep shoving more stuff in there. Well, that's what we do. 3 meals a day? Minimum? Most important meal is breakfast. The minute you get out of bed, eat. What happens when you're just born? You open your mouth to cry and they stick a breast or a bottle in your mouth. So, right? That's it. So no wonder we grow up with these oral problems, right? Because that's how we did you cry? So we stuff our children and we stuff ourselves. So we're eating all day long, and what we get is an inefficient system. We're unable to absorb. We're unable to function. We don't get the nutrients. So that's why what you see in obesity is you see overfed, undernourished. They can't process what they're getting. So, and carbohydrates are, if that energy can become very toxic, and it starts to ferment. So it's got to be stored quickly, and it's stored as fat. That's how carbohydrates are stored as fatty acids. And then that becomes a reservoir for other toxins. Okay, so it makes more sense just thinking of the tube. The best way to feed it or take care of it is to don't put any more in until what you just put in is already gone. For the most efficient function. Because if I got something going on here and something going on here and something going on here, it's not concentrated energy. We're not getting the best function. The amount of energy required for eating you can find out if you don't eat. If you don't eat, you sleep less, you got more energy. I have two children, and when they were young, one ate a lot and one didn't. One every other day, if he ate skinny, he was bouncing off the wall. He ate less. So, what's that saying? So anyway, it comes down to, when you think about the function of the human body, 1 meal a day probably. Or maybe 1.5. Or maybe every other day. We're finding all creatures seem to live longer if they eat every other day. Nature kind of does this naturally. What else is it? That's kind of nature naturally. But, by not always having food available for organisms. They won't be able to find food one day, so they won't eat. They're not eating all the time. So nature's allowing them to fast. Not eat. So, anyway, the energy required for eating, for digesting, assimilating, absorbing, and processing all this food is so much that it becomes healing and repair is at a minimum. So while you're eating, your healing and repairing is minimal. When you stop eating, all this energy is now available for healing and repair. So, what happens over the years when you keep doing this is that all the cells are bathed in a fluid. It's called the extracellular space. That fluid is fed by arteries and arterioles, actually, capillaries, and it's drained by lymph and veins. That becomes full of sludge. So our cells are basically sitting in a toxic sewer, in a sewage. When they're in this sewage, because it hasn't been cleansed, because we put the wrong things in, and there's poisons and pesticides, and even if you ate pure organic food but ate it all day long, you'd be in big trouble. It doesn't matter. It just depends on how much toxic. So as here, these cells, of course, they become dysfunctional. They can't work as well. And that accumulation of toxins around cells is toxemia, toxicity. Emia refers to blood, so as it leaks out of the blood, it becomes toxemia. But basically, it's toxic. Toxic means it's stuff. A toxin can be defined as a substance that cannot be used by the body, and if it remains there, it will cause dysfunction. And a food would be defined as something which can be used by the body and is required for functioning. The trick is that too much of anything, even a food, becomes a toxin. Oxygen, really important. If you put 100% mask on you for a couple of weeks, you get emphysema. You can't breathe 100% on it. Water is very important. You drink 2 to 3 gallons a day, you'll die. Okay, so when we talk about food and poison, we're talking about the appropriate amount of substances that are required for functioning. Now that which remains in our GI tract is in our colon, and we call feces. How long should we leave it in there? Well, because people have a problem with colonic, I don't want to do that, or I'm fine, I have 1 bowel movement a day. Well, how much? This much? 2 bowel movements? 3 bowel movements? How long is the colon? 5 feet? So tell me who's having enough bowel movements? So if you're not, what's happening is that stuff is staying in there, and again, it's being absorbed. And when it gets absorbed into it goes right to the liver. So how many meals a day? 1 meal a day, at the most. 1.5. Okay? If you stop eating, and when you're not eating, what are you doing? You're healing and repairing. Okay, so the guy that I know lives up in Sedona had colon cancer and ulcerative colitis. And intuitively said, I know I'm going to stop eating. And he stopped eating. He just drank water for 42 days. Gone. He's still up there. He's got he and his wife teach raw food. And, he does colonics.
What's his name?
Ruel.
Ruel? That's his last name?
First name. So, all creatures, when they're sick, stop eating. All religions have periods required of fasting. From Christ to Buddha and everyone in between. So, nature requires it, spirituality requires it, but because of the way we grew up being stuffed, in fact, we use that word right after stuffed. In fact, we don't stop eating until we're stuffed. We think we have to be stuffed. And what stuffed means is you put so much in there, it's not working. Did you ever see a pinball machine when you hit it the wrong way and it tilts? That's what happens. We don't stop till it tilts. You know the energy required to take care of that turns off all chances of healing in your brain. Most people are eating that much all the time.
If you have an appointment, do you have to make it if it's active?
Yes. You let them go. Yeah. So anyway, but basically that's it. I just wanted to try to give you an idea of what is food, how often should we eat, and are there benefits in not eating? Each one of those subjects is, is a book. But are we up? 20 minutes
We
left.
only talked 40 minutes. That's 9:53.
Oh, okay, but I'm supposed to be done at 10.
But,
Yeah. 5 minutes.
I know.
So is it better to actually graze than to have 3 meals? Would it be better just to have little bites during the whole day?
No, 1 meal a day. You need to allow your GI. If you're grazing, you're engaging all parts of your GI system all day long. And you're going to make it less efficient. So you put in you sit down and you should eat as close to mono foods as possible. So that, for efficiency. And you think about it, in nature, what would you do? You'd come upon an avocado tree. And you'd eat avocados that day. For that. So, why is that good? If you're eating one thing or just a couple things, is that the enzymatic and other requirements for digestion are being called into play, and you don't have to, the more you call into play, the less efficient it is. And that's why when you look at food combining books, they say you don't eat fruit alone, you don't eat it with anything else, you don't eat carbohydrates with proteins. The reason you don't do that is because they require such different biochemical environments for proper and efficient digestion that they kind of cancel each other out and you get it formed. So if you eat a carbohydrate and a protein together, which is our favorite food, steak and potatoes, burgers with bread, right? Fish and rice, cheese and bread. When you put those two things together, proteins require one biochemistry. They require an acid environment. Carbohydrates require alkaline. So what's going to happen? You're going to get a neutral. So neither are going to get done well. And what happens to protein? It putrefies. And what happens to the carbohydrate? It ferments. So we get gas. We call it indigestion. So we fed our tongue, not our body. We're pleasing our tongue. And remember, all that, and that's just appetite, and it's learned. Because remember, in different parts of the world, they have different appetites. Right? From bugs to brains to testicles to, maggots, tarantulas. And and people from those cultures think, I can't live without that. Life's not worth living if I can't eat some monkey brain. Life's not worth living if I can't eat tarantulas. That's what life's all about. It's true. There are some tribes in South America. So not only do they eat tarantulas, they have religion with tarantulas. So anyway, but that's appetite. Okay, appetite has nothing to do with hunger. Appetite is learned. You can have an appetite for heroin, an appetite for cigarettes. You can have an appetite for whatever. Appetite is not it's a learned thing. It has nothing to do with hunger, which is required for normal physiology. And hunger is never painful until it becomes extreme. So when your stomach hurts, because you ate too much, you're starting to clear out. Doesn't mean you need to put more in. Because if you put more in, it'll tilt again and you go, So what we think is feeling good is really when all the machinery is turned off. We're stuffed. We fall back. We can't think. We're sleepy. Well fed is what we call it. 3 meals a day. Eat the moment you wake up. Eat immediately, and just eat all day. If you don't go to the bathroom, that's okay. Well, a few days is okay. And the reason that's okay because we're going to feed you right into the medical industrial complex. And you'll become a patient at a young age. I hear now that they are diagnosing 6-month-old babies with depression and putting them on antidepressants.
What about?
Right?
I mean, how can they use that or something like
Huh?
that?
Statins for 8-year-olds.
Right, statins, to bring down the cholesterol. Right? We have type 2 diabetes happening in early adolescence. We usually didn't earn that disease until we were in our late 40s. Now we're earning it at the age of 12. Huh? Yeah. So, it's just crazy. And then our food is so, and then we're not even talking about the pollution in the food. I mean, that's a whole other issue. We're just talking about overeating stuff that you need. But now, if you put pesticides, herbicides, fungicides in the food, the suffix on the end of a word, CIDE, means death, kill. Suicide, homicide, genocide, infanticide. Pesticide, herbicide, fungicide. You want to eat that? It's okay. That's what non-organic means. So you have to pay extra for them not to add the poison. You have to pay extra.
Well, that's because it's all subsidized. Almost big agricultural. Yeah. 10,000.
So anyway, that's it. So eat less. Less is more. And you'll notice when you fast and stuff, you don't need to eat. You don't, the more you eat, the more you need. The more you eat, the more you need. The less you eat, you get a clear head. And then you can eat rationally. God, I haven't had any greens today. I haven't had this. Instead of saying, what do you feel like? Well, I feel like a pizza. I feel like that. That's how we, instead of, what do I, did I? And if you can't figure it out, don't eat. The best meal you ever had is the one you didn't eat.
I think coming in here and having our blood sugar tested for IBT and also going through the fast, whatever, is very telling because you do see that, okay, I've been fasting since last night's dinner and my blood sugar is right where it's supposed to be, not low, as I used to think it was. I have maybe a little feeling of hunger or something early in the morning.
Right.
It's not. It's right there at 90. And of course, since they base these test results of what we should see on the average, and the average is the wrong figure, now they're saying, your blood sugar could be like up to 100. But it used to be 70 to 90. Now they're saying 80 to 100. It's just not based on reality.
It's like weight charts and right, all that stuff. They had to decrease the number of seats in was it Yankee Stadium in order to accommodate people because they're bigger.
I see fewer fat people here than I do at home.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Amazing.
There was a European, I think she was involved with fashion or something, and she was in Minnesota, and she said she met many people who looked like small houses. And I think in the winter.
Well, it starts,
Colder climates.
Well, again, if you think about it, why? Those are not where we belong. We don't belong in those climates. We're not designed for those climates. We're designed for tropics. We're primates. That's where we thrive. Because there's abundant substances available for our requirements. So, but as we left our niche, the environment in which we have performed a particular function, as we left it, we improvised, accommodated. So that's why we do all this stuff. So in cold climates, you wind up overeating.
So would you comment just a moment on the theory of having to eat your complete protein from animal sources, or versus getting your amino acids that are not always in a complete form, then how your body handles it.
Well, that whole idea of getting a complete protein from animal sources was born out of marketing efforts of the meat and dairy industry. The meat and dairy industry talk about that. And what they call a complete protein are the proteins that are in an egg. An egg is like the fundamental protein. But remember, we don't need proteins, we need amino acids. If I eat the protein from another animal, I can't use it. I have to break it down into amino acids, absorb those amino acids, and then my body will produce the proteins that I need. Okay, you can't use protein from another organism. You have to break it down into its constituent parts, which are amino acids, absorb those amino acids, and your body will make the proteins that you need.
So where are these amino acids hanging out until they get put together? Just all over?
They circulate, yeah.
Pool somewhere. I never heard of it.
No, they get absorbed into the blood, and they're circulating, and they're grabbed immediately.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
You need this when you grab it, and there's a little lysine, and there's a little protein and whatever.
Mm-hmm. So the whole idea about a complete protein is just a marketing tool. It has nothing to do with the truth. In fact, if you want to take that statement a little bit further, and unfortunately it turns out to be true, is that everything that we've ever learned is opposite of the truth. Not everything, but close to it. So we don't, unfortunately, especially in the last 2 centuries, or the last
well, it gets slicker. How they suck you in with marketing. Everybody does.
Oh yeah, they do.
You almost hear, or things that you read, or people that talk say, well, maybe a vegan diet isn't healthy because vegans don't get B12 and they're usually lacking in B12. What would be a counterpoint to that?
Well, B12 is made by bacteria. So the cow that has B12 in his liver is because he ate plants that were not heated and not cleaned. Right? And so he's got her bacteria in her body are complete. So that bacteria produces the B12. So the reason that we don't do it anymore is because the bacteria in our body are so, we've got what would be for normal functioning, if you need 2% of this kind of organism, 8% of this, we don't have those combinations anymore. And we don't have any or enough that are producing any of the B12. So, once we start eating long enough, properly, our bodies will get the flora in our body will again be able to produce B12. But that's and you don't. But remember, it doesn't come from an animal. It's not an animal-based thing. It's a bacteria.
Well, that's what things that I've read before, where they always say, "Oh, the only place you can get B12 is from an animal product." Right.
It's not. And if you just look it up, look at the biochemistry, it's something that's produced by a bacteria. So the animal that has it got it from the bacteria, either from what they ingested or because they have that bacteria in their gut. So,
but for us to get it from plants requires.
Well, again, it's kind of like we also talk about soil-based organisms. They're really important. We need for proper functioning. We have over 100 trillion organisms that live in and on us. It's a lot. Without them, we're dead. So they're part of us as much as our skin is part of us. So we can't think of them as them. It's just another. Where do we end? Where do we begin? And so they're part of us. So we just need to when we get proper balance, we'll have those bacteria that are producing what we call B12. We're the worst. They're vegan. They don't eat meat. What they do is they throw these concepts at us, and we believe it. Just like we believe that commercial, everybody needs milk. Remember that? Everybody needs milk. They don't say it anymore. They say got milk. Why? Because they got sued. Because it's not the truth. They got sued. It's not the truth. Infants need milk, and they need milk that's called human milk. Cows need cow's milk. Rats need rat's milk. Okay? You certainly, you want to have a healthy rat, are you going to give it cow's milk? You're going to give it rat's milk. All of what they asked us to do is to erase our common sense. Right. And now they know. They call it pester factor. You know the pester factor? You advertise to young kids and they pester their parents to buy it. It's illegal in a lot of European countries. They don't show commercials to children until like the age of 12 or 13. On their TV shows, there's no commercial.
No, they have no filter.
It's immoral. You're developing what? Appetites. Appetites are abnormal needs, unnecessary needs. Okay.